Against the tech showcase, so we've weeded out all the week and we just have the hardcore GovTech folks remaining. But first want to just thank Caroline Tenby Smith for helping to coordinate the panel, and also want to thank Yale and Yale Ventures for hosting this panel, but also hosting a civic track. There aren't many conferences that have a civic track. It's a really important time to have one. And the technology we're going to talk about is really important. It's what powers our government. As a result, it's what powers a pretty large swath of our economy. It's what delivers critical services to citizens. So it's a really important topic that sometimes gets overlooked. So kudos to Yale for kind of elevating the conversation and creating this forum. We're going to talk about a bunch of topics today. Most of them are focused on Elon Musk. Kidding, sort of. And we have a really an A-list panel here. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to introduce everyone. You guys can add or subtract anything that I miss here. But start with Jeff. Jeff Cook is with Shea and Company. He's really the leading investment banker in the GovTech market. He puts out gold standard data on M&A activity, valuations, trends in the space, thought pieces, and really does a big service to the market and just bringing this data to light and bringing transparency to the market and advising on deals. So he can provide kind of the industry level view of what's going on. We have John Kelly, zooming all the way down. John is an academic from Columbia turned entrepreneur who started a really fascinating, important company called Graphika that he'll be able to tell you about in a bit. But Graphika in part sells to large federal agencies. And so John will be able to bring us the perspective of a founder who's starting a company that's selling to government agencies and probably the toughest part of the GovTech market, large federal agencies. So John will be able to talk about that. We're lucky to have Mark Raymond. Mark is the CIO, Chief Information Officer for the state of Connecticut, and I think the longest tenured CIO of any state in the country. And Connecticut's seen definitely as a thought leader, thanks to Mark's leadership. He's widely lauded for Connecticut's work around COVID, standing up track and trace, the COVID database, all the systems that had to go into Connecticut's really good response to COVID. And also the Connecticut DMV, which DMVs around the country are often a source of friction, and the Connecticut DMV actually gets 5-star reviews on Yelp, which is, I think, deserves an award just for that. That is a true sign of leadership. And lastly, Phillip Sanders from New Media Ventures, and Phillip will be able to bring the investor perspective. He's an investor in a fund that's a really interesting model. It's across GovTech and civic tech, for-profits and nonprofits with a social impact lens wrapped around it. And so Phil will be able to talk about kind of emerging trends in the space, what he looks for in companies to fund in GovTech versus maybe some other spaces, what's really important to see in your early stage companies. So really good breadth on the panel. We've got 10,000-foot industry view. We've got the public sector view, we've got the entrepreneur's view, we've got the investor's view. And so anything you guys want to edit out of that? This is being recorded, so this is going to be official.
That's perfect, Dan. Perfect.
Okay, because there's some breadth, I'm going to go to kind of some domain-specific questions for each of the panelists. But before we get there, I wanted to ask one around the horn question, try to get you all in a little bit of trouble here. And yeah, we're going to talk about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency initiative led by Elon Musk and the Trump administration, which has been controversial to say the least. And, you know, while its implementation seems to have largely been kind of cost-cutting, the initial idea was actually quite a big, you know, rather inspiring idea of like looking at, can we have a national project looking at the operating infrastructure of the company and think of a cutting edge, you know, operating system for the country. And, you know, while I think the implementation certainly hasn't gotten to the digital transformation piece of that, just love to go around the horn and hear, you know, from your perspectives being in the space, what were your impressions of DOGE? If you want to get in trouble, you know, how's it going? And then, and also, you know, in the spirit of aspirational thinking, just as you think about kind of what we're working towards in this work, what are some characteristics of like what that end state looks like, what the goal is, what success looks like, you know, based on your work in the space? So comments on DOGE and then kind of vision for where we need to get to. And anyone who wants to catch that falling knife first is welcome to jump in.
As someone who's in my day job is in the way of the falling knife, closer to it than others, because we do have about 40% of Graphika's revenue is federal money. I'll just offer some thoughts. So the first thing I'd say is anybody that's been around federal contracting for a long time, has been doing it for years, as we have, would probably say yes, the government can accomplish everything that it is trying to accomplish for 30% less money. It's like, you see the waste up close. Like, just as an example, earlier in the phase of Graphika's history, not so much now because we're able to get these contracts directly, a frequent occurrence is we would get called in by some prime contractor in a government contract that was, over a year into a 2-year contract, say they were getting $2 million, and they hadn't solved the thing yet. They hadn't been able to deliver the deliverable, and they found us because we were the experts in that thing, and they brought us in and wanted us to finish it for them for $200,000 so they could kind of slide it under the finish line and have the project not be considered a failure. And in the early days of the company, I'm like, I need the $200,000. I'll do it. But I'm really mad that we're not getting the $2 million. And the lesson here is that this probably ought to have cost $200,000 in the hands of the right person and not $2 million in the hands of some Beltway bandit that's just going to waste a lot of it, So that kind of stuff happens all the time. I think my understanding of what some of the Doge team's own people now say, who have sort of left and are going, I learned a lot when I was in there, is that their impression was that lots of government programs were basically in themselves wasteful or doing nothing. And they've realized that, no, actually the government does a lot of very important stuff. So are there some programs you could cut and be no skin off the teeth of the American public? Sure. But a lot of these programs are actually really, really doing important stuff. And so I think the problem from my perspective with Doge was not the ambition to streamline the cost to the taxpayer of a lot of these programs. It was the haphazard and kind of memeified way in which it was done. Not only just didn't work, because it's, but it also just undermined the public's confidence in the initiative itself. When I think you really could make a difference, and you might be able to use technology to make a difference, but it has to have a different look. And that different look is not, keyword searches on hundreds and hundreds of federal programs for politicized keywords and then striking all those down. It's understanding, because of course people who are writing grants and applying for government stuff will laden their proposals with whatever the buzzwords are. It's not necessarily tightly related to what the public benefit of the thing is. So long story short, there's a lot you can do, but it's all around changing the process to get more tooth and less tail in the engagements, not to just kind of wholesale go through and cut down a bunch of the trees in the forest. Yeah.
A great perspective. I liken the effects of what's happening to Thanos from, the Avengers, right? Which is, I'm going to snap my finger and half my problem's going to go away. But I don't think the end justifies the means here. And if we're at a conference around innovation, one of the things about innovation is it needs to be sustainable. And it was mostly done in a way that was not, right? Like you can cut anything in the short run and people will find a way to survive. We don't often see the impacts of that for 5 years, right? Or, some of the things that government's in the business of providing stability services to the people who need it most. And we've done that. We've created this really complicated set of environments that makes it really difficult to change, so that people can rely on it. And so I think that the idea that you can just create a set of constraints, I think that was the fundamental thought. Like, we're going to create this constraints, we're going to cut your resources substantially, and then you're going to find the way to become more efficient. When the impacts are to the people who are actually the ones that need to find a way to be more efficient, I think it's created more damage than was intended, and I think it's going to take a bunch of time to recover from that. And so what we're seeing, and some of the things that you shared, John, is people are now saying, "Oh, I get it. Now I understand why, the USAID program, farmers really need that, right? They're understanding the interconnectedness of some of the things that we have underway and why we shouldn't be working so just quickly to get some of the outcomes. I do totally agree that strategically adding constraints to the environment helps to get at some of those inefficiencies that exist.
Great.
Thanks for that. Maybe I'll take a little bit of a different flavor, which is talking about the state and local market and sort of the trickle-down effects of DOGE. DOGE obviously started out really focused on, big federal programs, big federal areas of spend. My capacity, what I do is I spend a lot of time advising primarily state and local focused GovTech businesses. That could be software, that could be technology-enabled services. And, in that capacity, spent a lot of time with operators, so CEOs, CFOs, COOs, senior management, founders of these GovTech companies, but also with the investor community, venture investors, private equity firms, large, strategics or companies looking to acquire in this space. That's sort of the ecosystem that I spent a lot of my time in. And, it was interesting. I mean, first, I just couldn't believe how often we were using the term Doge, which I just thought of as a meme coin from a few years ago. But that was like, the topic of conversation for the first part of this year. And, now we're starting to see some of the effects and people like develop perspectives on the market. But I think the headline for us is, I think it's going to be a net accelerator, specifically for the state and local market. And, maybe this is oversimplifying it, but the way I think about it is, you have supply and demand curves, and the demand is simply going to be the demand for citizen services, which is the role of government. And you look at the consumption of citizen services, and that's going to track GDP growth, it's going to track population growth, but it's very cyclical and sort of consistently growing in a way that, that you just look and say it happened for the last 50 years, it's going to happen for the next 50 years. And that line is moving slowly up and to the right. And then, the flip side of that is the supply side of that, right, which, historically has been government labor. And what you've seen over the last few years, I mean, one of the things every operator I've spoken with has pointed to as sort of a driver of their growth has been the fact that, there just are not enough sort of butts in seats, to use that term, to render services. And that's why, you wait in line at DMV. That's why it takes a long time to get a permit issued for your house. And so, you have almost like a flat supply curve, right? Or I guess flat line. And, with a lot of the focus of DOGE being on reduction in human capital and sort of the state inspired, I think there's 26 state agencies that are inspired by DOGE, that's really been the focus. And so what you have is this gap that exists, right? And I think what will fill that gap is going to be technology. That's certainly the role it's played over the last few years. You started to see this play out post-COVID, where where labor couldn't go into the office, right? Where you couldn't access services, and you saw this huge inflection in growth in the overall GovTech market. And thinking about what that curve is going to look like if DOGE does really trickle down and start impacting the sort of the human capital component of government at the state and local level, that's only going to require technology to play a bigger role over time. And so, and the other side of it, I would say, is the operators that I speak with. We talk about the outlook for growth. What does your pipeline look like? What are sales cycles look like? How are things slowing down? Are they accelerating? And I'm yet to hear someone say, geez, like our outlook for 25 is totally different from a business perspective because of DOGE. And so it might be a little bit, rose-colored glasses, but I do think over the long term, it's going to be sort of one of these events like we saw in COVID that's just going to accelerate, the digital transformation that we're seeing in government.
Thank you for that. And I just want to piggyback off what Jeffrey had mentioned. So what we're seeing, so I'm coming at it from a different perspective as well. We fund a lot of early stage startups in the media space, civic tech, as well as advocacy and organizing space. So what we've been seeing is a lot of emerging startup founders create solutions to these so-called government inefficiencies. So I do believe that technology will be this situation will accelerate the type of innovation we're seeing. So, for example, we do open calls pretty frequently. Folks are reaching out to us me being because we're in Silicon Valley, we see a lot of innovation come out of there. So with GovTech really kind of like exploding, being kind of like that hot topic, especially when it comes down to Doge, I do see an opportunity where we're going to see more and more startup founders create solutions to some of these government inefficiencies, and they're going to use some of the feedback from how much was saved, how much is still outstanding. I think Elon had mentioned he had a goal of like saving about $2 trillion, and then it was reduced to 150 billion. So I think that publication, I'm going to see more. I believe I will see more entrepreneurs tackle. Okay, well, what happened within that gap? Can we come in and create a solution around that? How can this be funded? Some folks I'm seeing say, hey, I was affected by government cuts. I now want to create a solution around what I've been seeing working in government for a number of years. So I do feel as though there's going to be a lot more innovation come out over the next 2 to 3 years, for sure. Yep.
It's an interesting point on the human capital coming out. We're seeing in a lot of our portfolio companies some really interesting applicants who are coming out of the government looking to move into the private sector. And I imagine a lot of them will become entrepreneurs themselves to solve problems that they saw. Okay, one last thought on Doge, and then we'll move on. So my view, despite what the Elon haters say, and I'm sensing that there are some nearby, there is a piece of evidence that shows that Doge actually has been an overwhelming success, which is that, folks close to procurement know that large procurements can take, months, they can take years to actually purchase something. But the President of the United States was able just to procure a luxury Boeing 747 in just 2 days. That's procurement progress. So that's what I was going to get you guys. Okay, so we're going to move to a few more kind of domain-specific questions. Mark wanted to ask the first one to you. Government doesn't have a great reputation for tech adoption. We've all stood in the DMV lines if we live outside of Connecticut, printed out PDF forms. And so just, there's this experience of just like the technology we use in our day-to-day lives, and this gulf between that and the technology we use when we interact with government and, seeing government more closely, the technology government uses to operate internally often. And, there's a lot of narratives around why that is, and would love to just get your perspective on kind of getting us to first principles of like, why is there that gap? What are the constraints that maybe folks don't realize? Extending off that, what have you done in Connecticut to do a good job with that? And kind of what are you most optimistic about looking forward on that journey?
Yeah, great question. So I think when people look at government in general, they actually don't draw great lines between federal government, state government, local government. They tend to, if you're not an aficionado of government services, it's sort of all the same, right? Underneath all that, we've got 50 different agencies that are in completely different lines of business. We have people who build buildings and people who build roads. We have people who provide financial assistance to folks. We're in the hospitality industry, right? If you think about our prisons or we're in the hospital industry. So there's a lot of different work that we do. And one of the impediments is that we don't add scale to that. Each one of those operates as sort of its own kind of business, which is a horrible way to really, effectively get services. It also prevents us from meeting the residents where they are, right? Because you end up having to provide your data multiple different times. You're like, hey, didn't I just give that to someone? Well, yeah, you gave it to the tax department, right? The tax department says you can't give it. They can't share it with you. So, it creates this. There are reasons why we're not allowed to share data from one agency to another, and those things inhibit our internal ability to move fast and provide services. The pandemic, for a bunch of different ways, forced us to think differently. I think one of the most powerful things for government was it demonstrated that the population was now ready to use technology in a different way. We always knew the population was, but now we have evidence that most segments of the population were. And government has to provide services to every segment of the population, right? So, but if, grandpa has to get on a Zoom to see his family, we now know that those technologies are viable for us to deliver services. So it forced a change in our thinking, which was really good, and then demonstrated the readiness of the public. So what we have been doing is trying to eliminate the divisions between our government agencies and the functions that we provide, and deliver what you can think about it as a personalized government experience. So really, what do you need and what do you want from us? Versus here's the 5,000 things that we offer that you've got to navigate your way through. Like, to get services from the government today, mostly, first you have to learn who provides the service. And then you've got to find your way there. And then you've got to describe your problem to them, where we make it difficult for folks to do that. So we have been on this journey under the governor's leadership. The government said he wanted to have an all-digital government. So we've been working down that path to really personalize the experience and say, you may only care about the tax department and the motor vehicle department. Maybe you want campgrounds and fishing, but you don't care about the rest. So we don't have to show you the rest, right? We can use your interaction with us and your consent to assemble what government looks like for you. And so we can do that well at the state level. We can pull in those other resources at the local government level who struggle far more than we do at the state level, and being able to deliver that and begin to provide a more cohesive experience. I will say that journey has demonstrated some fruit along the way. I do think that sort of the AI machine learning technologies that we're seeing along the way provide us it will be really disruptive and allow us to move much more quickly on that. So I'm looking forward to explore that some more as well.
And maybe talk a bit about procurement, because I know it's often a sticking point for entrepreneurs. And it just feels like such a bottleneck in the space. Like, even once you've decided you want to go down a certain path, then the actual process of the solicitation documents, the RFP reviews, the vendor selection, all of that, it can just take so long. So maybe, do you have any thoughts on kind of how to streamline that, or what Connecticut's done on the procurement front?
A couple of thoughts around that. So we, before the pandemic even started, we said we want to do this digital government thing because the governor asked us to go ahead and do that. And we went from beginning to end of a procurement in 4 months. From the beginning to a contract in 4 months. We didn't change a rule that we had. We changed the people who are making the decisions, and we pushed people to, here's the outcomes that we're looking for, and we didn't put together a 500-page set of requirements that people had to respond to. So, we set it up to become more efficient. Most states will allow you to move that way today. The other thing is, at the national level, we've been working with a bunch of different companies about what makes procurements go slow. And it turns out that a 2-page summary at the very beginning that just says, here's the scope, here's how much money we have, here's the dates. If you could provide that information, then companies can move 5 times faster to the decision of, do I want to bid? Does this make sense for us? Can we move? But in that summary of what it is that you're trying to do, can really accelerate the procurement process. I think we can use and have been using generative AI to help provide that kind of insight, both to our teams who are looking for solutions and, to the benefit of folks who are working through procurement. So there's a lot of rules that we have. Government is set up to ensure that there's competition at every cent of the matter. If you all are here with innovative solutions of which your fundamental belief is there's no competitors to what we do. How does our process that looks for competitors work in that environment? So, the state's done some innovative things around testing, running some pilot projects that you can, vendors, innovators can fund. We can try it. And if it looks like there's sustainable value there, we can move that right, and we can move to contract. It doesn't fit all scenarios, but I think those are some of the things that we can really do to smooth the process forward.
One last question is just on the kind of build versus buy decision-making process. What are kind of the key, the framework you use to decide when you would build something internally with your team versus privatize? And has that changed with kind of changes in labor or changes in the GovTech ecosystem over your tenure?
I wouldn't say that it's changed much. I'd say that, at least since I've been here, the ability to build solutions with state folks has been, few and far between. Most of the solutions are, we work with industry if something needs to be built, that is the last course of action. And if it needs to be built, it's often being built with industry partners to help build it. And so, we're looking for platforms and, low code environments, delivered solutions that are already working, right? That's our fundamental first place. But as I described before, in all the crazy individual businesses we have, some things don't fit that model, right? Some things we can't change how we do it. We'd rather change how and then use something that's a commodity instead of, keep how we do it and then have to build something in specific. So for us, it's change the process, buy a platform or existing solution, build it the last, if we have to, and build it internally, only as for sort of really small kinds of solutions.
Okay, John, I'm just going to put you in the hot seat here. So you're on the other side of this public-private partnership. You've been running a company for 10 years, scaling up from just you to a pretty sizable company at this point. Would love for you, just because Graphika is such an interesting company, such an important company, would love to just have you talk about the founding story and what you guys do for a few minutes, and then make some comments on kind of the go-to-market motion of how you, with very little resources, can get traction in this really tough environment to sell into. And then maybe a couple comments just on like ideas for what could folks like Mark, or in your case it's federal folks running procurements, but what could be done to make it easier for companies like yours to scale up quickly?
Sure. I could talk about that for 3.5 hours probably. So let me try and do this. Let me do the 10-minute version. So I'm a computational network sociologist by training. I got a PhD from Columbia, and instead of going into academia, I took my dissertation, which was about using machine learning to detect communities in very large-scale weblog networks before social media, and turned it into a company, Graphika. So what we specialize in doing with advanced technology is mapping out online communities that emerge from all the choices people make, who to follow, what to like, across social media platforms and the internet. The company was founded to be a marketing tech company. So like our first big customer is Condé Nast, for mapping out communities around women's fitness and elite travel and golf and things that Condé sold magazines into. That turned out to be a difficult way to build the company. And what we pivoted to beginning in 2015 was more of a security focus, where what we do, because so many risks and dangers emanate from the internet, we can use our fantastic technology to detect those and alert our customers to them. The beginning use case was detecting foreign state information operations manipulating the American elections. I was on the Senate Intelligence Committee's technical advisory group analyzing all the data that Twitter, Facebook, and Google gave them around Russian activity in 2016. So after that, on the back end of that kind of activity, we had a national security-oriented use case for the government, and we had a trust and safety and security-oriented use case for the platforms. Google, Facebook, Twitter, for a while until they stopped paying their bills after somebody took over. We're big customers, but we work for Pinterest and Discord and the other kind of platforms too. What we're helping them do is detect when somebody is some kind of danger is going to encroach on their platform, from anything from the Chinese government or the Russian government to Nazis or other kind of dangerous organizations around the world. So The technology enables that on the private side, increasingly things like financial services, scams, frauds, et cetera, increasingly things like AI-generated non-consensual sexual imagery, things like that, we work on too. So we're helping basically defend customers with advanced technology from dangerous, horrible stuff on the internet. And that is governments, United States trying to prevent the Chinese government from undermining public support for us in the Philippines, to, Facebook trying to defend themselves from all kinds of other stuff. Okay, that's who we are and what we do. How the government fits into it is that there's a very different sort of sales cycle, sales motion, contract structure, everything on the government side and the private side. And we're about 60% commercial, 40% federal. What we have learned on the federal side to be successful is not to go after those little $200,000 leftovers from the prime contractors, but to go directly at government work. And we've taken a multi-tiered approach, which is focused first of all on R&D sources of money. We have a fantastic technical R&D team. So working with DARPA, Office of Naval Research, on advanced R&D creates capabilities that then we can pitch in other contracts on a more of an operational level. So it's understanding the government need around what our technology can provide for national security, and focusing on every part of that chain from the R&D to create the capability all the way down to the deployment, proof points at organizations in the military, particularly that are around taking basic scientific discoveries and turning them into models of things that actually work, then all the way down into kind of operational technology that are being used on a daily basis. So our approach may not be everybody's approach, but it's been to sort of seize the entire process and be able to provide some kind of value along the way. Also, being the federal government, it does not hurt to make friends with congressional staffers on the key committees and to pitch the members when you have their ear, so that the sort of top cover from Congress understands the value of your programs and what they're doing for the American people. That's
anything, like, just as you've gone through cycles of procurement, any ideas that you've had where you're like, if this was, acquisition was organized this other way, that sure would make this, with respecting the fact that, like, a lot of the procurement rules are there for good reason, to prevent fraud, to encourage competition, to make sure, you're not hiring your nephew's contracting company to do so without compromising that, are there other models for how this relationship could work that could create less burden on the company, often thinly capitalized, to withstand those sorts of sales cycles and the upfront cost of that?
I mean, I've seen it go wrong a lot of times, and I think a lot of those kind of procurement rules that are probably legislated with the best of intentions, they just increase the tail and shrink the tooth. Frankly, on those programs, that's the main effect. So I've seen all kinds of ways in which well-intended procurement processes go wrong. I'd say fundamentally the biggest problem is when you've got a group of people in the government that need to solve a problem, and they do not have the expertise among themselves to understand what the real solution looks like. And so they're going through some kind of RFP, and they have a bake-off beauty contest with a bunch of people coming in to try and get the contract, and they simply don't actually know how to look at the winning horse and understand that's the winning horse. They just don't have the expertise to do it. They might need domain expertise. They might need more technical savvy than they have. So they pick, often the wrong company wins the beauty contest. And I've seen that happen again and again and again. I've also, sometimes the politics of those groups in the government go wrong. I mean, there's a situation where we were pitching something among 7 other players, and we were partnered with like one of the leading primes in the area, and we were literally the best people on the planet to do it. Of this particular topic this was about, we had 3 of the 5 top experts on the planet on our team. And they ended up going with another team, and we were shocked. We had no idea why. I found out over beers with someone, a year later, that the reason was that one of the people on the government side sitting on the table from a key partner in the effort from another agency that they needed to have on board was just going to pick up their marbles and go home unless their pet contractor got the job. Like, this kind of stuff happens all the time. So I think there's all kinds of little things like that mess up the process. Where I see things work well, because we do a lot of work in national security space, the main problem there is that you've got small companies, often with great capabilities or new ideas, trying to compete in a place where almost all the business is sucked up by 7 prime contractors. The Raytheons and the Lockheeds of the world are taking all the money. and there's just tiny little bits left. And so, the way that you often end up having to go in is you simply go meet the person at the prime, the gigantic prime that kind of owns that contract, and you pitch them because they're the actual decision maker, not the government. And that's bad. But if you're a small company like us, you got to get the deal by hook or by crook. You need to win the business. So where you try to go are and the military is really good about these things, these SIBRs, Small Business Innovation Awards. The Air Force has a really great program on it. In particular, we've done a lot of the Air Force stuff, but it lives at different places. And so there you're able to get much closer to the people that are actually trying to solve the problem and understand the technology problem, and you're able to go in there, and there's kind of very efficient stepped, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 way to kind of ramp into providing a solution to that. And that works way better. However, getting it into the phase 3 where you could end up getting the, $100 million contract that normally go to the prime, that last phase is still pretty hard. And so sometimes you still end up there like trying to find the right person at the prime contractor to knock on their door.
Thanks, John. Phil, I wanted to bring you in here because you're funding these small companies that are competing for the scraps. But actually, just stepping back, New Media Ventures, really interesting, innovative model, not like a traditional venture fund in its setup. So we'd love to hear you talk about explain what New Media does, why it's set up the way it is. And then, what are some trends that you're looking at right now that you think are really investable trends or theses that you have? And also, when you're evaluating companies that are going to be selling to government agencies or affiliated things, is there kind of a different DNA, different characteristics you look for in those companies versus ones that might just be selling in the commercial space?
No, thank you for that. As I mentioned briefly before, we sit at the intersection of philanthropy and venture capital. So oftentimes we have conversations with endowments, large foundations, and we also have a lot of conversations with other VCs. The goal is for us to co-invest in these startups or even support these nonprofit leaders. So we've been doing this for about 15 years, and it started out because we wanted to figure out how can we create a company or an organization that funds all types of businesses. Mm-hmm. So essentially during our early stages, we were funding LLCs, 501c4s, all types of organization structures because we believed in the type of communities we wanted these solutions to serve. So for us, it's always been around power building, centered around like media tech, disinformation, civic tech, as well as advocacy and organizing. So with that, we just thought okay, some of these folks are coming with all types of different business structures. Let's just be open to that. And throughout the 15 years, we've been able to kind of hone in into what we actually want to be. And we just wanted to continue to sit at this intersection of philanthropy as well as VC. So over the years, we used to put together these big open cycle process. Every year, we'll have 1,200 to 1,500 different applicants, and that was a little overwhelming. And we would usually choose 1% of those. And typically, when we started out, we would write check sizes between $50K and $150K, because again, we were seed investors at the early stage between pre-seed and Series A. So, but we will also give the same check sizes to any nonprofit organizations that have a budget less than $2 million. So throughout these years, we've been investing in over 150 different organizations. They are part of our portfolio, and we love the cross-pollination. How can the nonprofits learn from the for-profits and vice versa? Because it also creates a lot of efficiencies as well. Oftentimes, they're each other's customers. And we've seen a lot of growth and innovation around partners creating different companies from that. So we've been learning a lot from this type of cross-collaboration of nonprofits and for-profits. And when it comes to GovTech, with us, because we really funded civic technology, we've been seeing a lot of similarities around how these civic tech startups look at solutions, and how these completely just GovTech founders also look at solutions as well. So for us, when we're evaluating these particular solutions, we really look at the team. Like, why are you doing this? And we can kind of see through BS at times. Like, there are some bad actors in this space, and we're aware of that. We love to bring in subject matter experts to help us assess. Like, hey, we're seeing this company. They say that there's no other competition that's doing this. Is there a there for us? Can you help us with that? So oftentimes when we're looking at companies, we bring in subject matter experts, we look at the team, we see if there's an innovation in this particular solution, and will our check size actually be catalytic? Part of our secret sauce, too, is being able to not only write a check, but also reach out to our network to say, hey, here's why we're investing in these companies. This is why you all should write a check, too. Historically, for every dollar we give to a nonprofit or a for-profit, we're able to attract an additional $4. So us bringing in our network of folks to help like catalyze the funding of these innovations are really important, because people look at our work. So we're creating these mini research projects to share with other foundations, other endowments, as well as other VCs as to why you should invest in these companies. So for us, it's been a lot more difficult. I would say, like during the 2022, 2023, where I would say like AI really exploded, we start to see a trend in applicants and intakes. Like they started using certain buzzwords. They started using the same language. And we were able to pick up like, okay, everybody's using ChatGPT here. All right, so now we got to come in and have a different lens. So, and it was funny because we can look at data over the past 15 years and we can pick up trends as to what the hot topics were. I remember it was this, I say over a decade ago, everybody was creating coding boot camps. So a lot of the applications we saw were, oh yeah, we're creating this coding boot camp and this is going to be great. No one else is doing this. And then it went through this blockchain NFT era. Everybody was creating certain coins and things of that nature. And at the end of the application, it would say, oh yeah, and we're creating a blockchain too. And I'm like, you don't even understand this, you know? So it was a lot of trends, and we're able to see this throughout the years. And, you know, AI is like, you know, two most commonly used letters of the alphabet right now, and we're seeing that across the board. So for us to really assess, like, how are you actually using AI? Is this truly innovative, especially when it comes to GovTech? Some people say it is. You know, some are using like open AI and they're just creating a whole new interface on top of that, and they're just saying, hey, this is our new AI tech tool, and it's not really the case. You're reskinning it and just adding your flair on top of something. And sometimes when you drill down with those questions around like security, do you have a CTO? How are you assessing security threats? Usually you can assess that early on and really figure out how important these things are to certain founders. So, but yeah, I can go on for days. I have stories for days.
On the LP
Yeah.
side, so like I think when people think of impact investing, they often think of like climate tech or ed tech or health and wellness. And you know, it feels to me like GovTech is an impact investing space. I mean, like I always think of this company Binti that sells into foster care agencies and like helps use data analytics to like match families with kids more efficiently to have like less, you know, turnover in the foster care system. Seems like an incredibly impactful. I mean, the government affects people's lives in ways that the private sector doesn't, on issues that the private sector doesn't. And so it feels like investing in companies there can have a really deep impact on a set of issues that maybe aren't addressed in other impact investing sectors. Are you like, do you see that? Do you see impact investing LPs coming into civic tech, and maybe across your portfolio, so like a company or two where you could point to some outcomes that are, you know, civic tech companies that have driven outcomes? What are some of the outcomes that you see that are impactful?
Yeah, so some LPs, and we work with some, because LPs aren't investing in our fund, we're a 501c3. We work with other VCs, and other VCs are sharing like some of the stories their LPs want, right? So sometimes GovTech, especially when it comes down to like prison reform, you have some LPs that say, hey, I do not want any investments in any type of prison technology, even if it's associated with GovTech and it's a clear winner in terms of like ROI. But you do have folks come that's creating solutions for certain prisons to create more efficiencies there. And, you know, I've seen some folks that isn't something that we normally do. You know, for us, we do love looking at solutions that help brings government efficiencies to light, and how are they creating like, I would say, people power culture around what they're solving for. For instance, I would say we've invested in one company called Consensus, and what they do is they do a lot of surveys of like government entities and communities. They take surveys from the community and they share this with the state and local governments around like, hey, here are some of the things that the people in these communities are sharing. Here are some of the issues that they're bringing up. Can you solve for this? And they've been able to speed up their efficiencies by doing that, by solving it. So CoSensus is, I think it's, she's based out in New Jersey, and she's created this platform that allowed state and local governments to actually be on there and also have a platform where the people in the community feel like it's a safe space to share their thoughts around government infrastructure. So that's kind of something that we love funding. And oftentimes we have other VCs reach out to us to say, hey, we're looking for someone who's creating solutions, but they're utilizing AI ethically and responsibly. Could you let us know if you see that? So oftentimes we'll do that. We'll share memos with them about that. So, yeah.
Okay. Jeff, I'm going to bring you in here. So we've been, in the weeds a bit, and would love to zoom out. And I think the kind of stats around just the scale of this market are pretty staggering, and maybe folks don't appreciate it. So we'd love to just hear you talk about kind of zoom us out to the sector level, just kind of the scale of the GovTech market, the trends in terms of how it's growing, where it's growing, what you're seeing, and some of the main players. But just like how has the space evolved over the your tenure at Shea, and just give us some sense of the scale here.
Yeah. So in terms of scale, I think it's way bigger than any of us. I mean, I've been covering this space closely for more than a decade now, and there's not a week that goes by where I don't hear about another interesting company that just hasn't come up on our radar screen. And I mean, there's hundreds of companies we're tracking. And so the space is immense. I think probably the best way to illustrate it is I saw some chart at some point where if you look at if you plotted all 50 states, even setting federal aside, so states being state agencies and all the local municipalities that roll up to it, and you plotted out the 100 largest spenders on technology, all 50 states would be on there, alongside Microsoft and Salesforce and Google, right? And you zoom out and you think about the public companies that serve those private sector organizations. And there's an endless list of multi-billion-dollar companies that just focus on private sector. Public sector, look at the public companies out there. You have Tyler Technologies, you have Motorola, you have Axon, and then you don't really have anyone else, right? Which speaks to the opportunity. And so it's, you ask yourselves the question, like, where is all that spend? The reality is that the GovTech market is immensely fragmented. Pick any solution category: ERP, citizen engagement, first responder software. The list goes on, property tax administration software. And you will not find that single national vendor that's out there. You will find, a vendor, probably a founder-owned business that's serving a corner of a state, has wonderful customer relationships. And it speaks to just the opportunity, for businesses to scale sort of endlessly in a lot of these different markets that are within GovTech. So from opportunity set perspective, I think it's one of the largest and most underappreciated markets that exist within technology. From what I've seen over the last 10 years, it's funny. I mean, 10 years ago, people were like, you're going to start covering GovTech? Like, do you not like money? Do you not like do you not like being busy? Like, why would you cover that? And, at that time, it was looked at as, almost like the backwater of technology investing, right? So we're like 2012, 2013, and what was getting funded and what was valued in the tech world were these like grow at any cost, like marketing, sales, software, just as like cloud was sort of, kind of ripping through enterprise. And like that chapter has been over, right? And, the sort of, what people would say against GovTech at the time is it's slow moving. And we talked a little bit about procurement, and procurement just moves a lot slower than private sector. And so what you saw was businesses that weren't growing 100%, 200%, year over year at scale. But what those businesses were really efficient. They were generating probably some cash flow and they were growing well. But you fast forward to today, and I think a few things have happened. One, the cloud modernization's like come through government in a meaningful way. And I think even just from like a simple business model perspective, when you are selling, old way of selling software, big upfront costs for license and implementation, all of a sudden you're well into procurement thresholds and you're going to RFP. The advent of SaaS, if you think about it, spreads that cost over a long term. And so all of a sudden you just get more velocity in your business by being below these procurement thresholds. And that just unlocked a lot of growth in the market. So that paired with the fact that post-COVID, the market's just on a totally different trajectory in terms of the impetus to modernize digitally. And so that's all been, anchoring the market more around growth and less around, basically valuing businesses off of cash flow. And that's just been different. And so along the way, what's happened is valuations have more than doubled over the last probably 7-8 years. That happened sort of at the height of COVID. And over the last few years, what was once sort of this backwater of technology investing is now like the bright shiny object where everyone across the capital spectrum, from early stage sort of seed funds to Series A to later stage venture to private equity to pick your flavor of capital, they're looking for a way to deploy capital into the government market. One, because there's a lot more growth that we're seeing in the market. And two, if you look at all the institutional investments over the last 10 years and just how they've played out, all of them, with few exceptions, have been just wonderful, wonderful investments for their return. So I think the pattern recognition, more growth coming into the market, and the fact that for all the activity that we've seen, we're still at the tip of the, scratching the tip of the iceberg in terms of what the opportunity set represents. So, I think the brightest days are ahead, for sure.
Yeah, that's helpful. It does feel like there's a bit of a mismatch, like having invested in some GovTech companies and seen kind of the sales cycles and the hold times needed to scale. Mm-hmm. There's a bit of a mismatch between kind of the pace of scale in these companies and kind of the traditional 10-year fund life of a venture fund.
Yep.
Like a 4-year hold on one of these companies generally is not enough, but the quality of the revenue is different. You have a referential market, you have sticky customers that can last. And so, to kind of Phillip's like innovative model, like there may be some different models that make more sense in terms of, lower risk, lower return, longer time horizon, but very much more stable, less beta than, traditional venture capital. So it's sort of a different asset class.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the market rewards patient capital. Investment cycles just take longer. Maybe that's investing in an incremental salesperson to then get trained up, then to go sell to government. That's just going to take longer than it does in private sector. Developing a product, I mean, by virtue of it being a vertical and the rules and regulations that determine, well, here's exactly how a permit needs to be processed, or here's exactly how a payment needs to be taken in. There's more time that's required to roll out either product or investments in sales and marketing. But what you are rewarded with at the end of the day is just really loyal customers, right? I think what every GovTech founder, at least I've spent time with, is centered on is sort of the broader mission, right? They're not here to make a buck, right? They're here to do something, and whatever problem they're attacking, to do it that much better. I think because of that, you just get businesses that just have like more enduring characteristics, right? Where it's really focused on kind of the motherhood and apple pie, which is, treat your customers right. If you treat your customers right, there's sort of an endless amount of things you can do for them, and they probably won't leave. And so like the quality of sort of the revenue from government technology customers is way ahead of virtually other vertical I've seen.
We just got the 10-minute warning, so I'll do one more quick round robin. I was going to focus on kind of AI, but I'll broaden it to just like, let's just go around and talk about one trend you're seeing, one technology that you think is particularly promising, or it could be not technology related, something happening in the workforce or some other dimension, but just like a trend within GovTech and innovation that you think is really important that's happening right now that's going to have a really meaningful impact when we look back at this moment, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Anyone can feel free to jump in.
I'm holding the mic, I'll go. Actually, Mark and I were just chatting about it right before, so I'll take the AI topic. I've been sort of floored by just how fast how AI has crept into the conversation. Because I think about the transition within government from on-prem to cloud, and it took a long time, right? AI is happening a lot faster. I guess the perspective I have on AI, just for speaking with investors and representing businesses and operators, is in some markets, like the big massive horizontal markets, AI, like the conversation a lot of people are having is what is the existential risk that it presents to your business? Within the GovTech lens, I think it's been more focused on like what are the opportunities that AI can create. And there's, I'd say there's two flavors to that. One is like the actual product the end customer's using. And I think the further you are to touching the citizen, think like AI chatbots and just like discovering services on a massive government website. Like AI is playing a really interesting role there. Where the conversation is really focused with investors, though, is how can you become that much more an efficient business? There's some very table stakes stuff like customer success and go to market and just applying AI within that. But I think that one of the big trends we're seeing is there's a lot of complex implementation in government, but a lot of those implementations look very similar, right? Especially if you're talking about within the same region or the same state, there's probably data migration, and there's just a lot of sort of thorny, hours that you have to throw as a software vendor to implement the solution. And we've seen AI start to really dramatically accelerate the time from a contract sign to go live because there's a lot of routine things there. And so I think, at least from our purview and the companies I spend time with, like that's going to be a really, really transformational sort of facet of the market over the next few years.
One of the things I'm looking forward to, I don't know if it's a trend, is, the way government works is often the policy is set without a lot of data behind it around impact, implementation, cost, timeline, ROI. And so I do see a number of these technologies, like, looking at data, looking at complicated graph data, and being able to tie together policy decision making with synthetic data, with understanding timelines and impacts that will, both illuminate the policy process, probably in ways that people are going to be really uncomfortable with, right? Because they'd like to make what sounds like a really easy change, but it's going to be a lot more complicated once they understand the aspects of it. But a lot better decision making around, hey, we'd like to do this, here's the outcome, and here's what's going to be the cost. So I see these technologies converging in a way that allow us to leverage better decision making, up at the front, whether that's increase of law, whether it's increase of regulations, or even standards, right? Here's what the modeled implication looks like and the cost associated with doing that.
So when I look at AI, I see some opportunities, but I mainly see a giant flashing danger that I think is the responsibility of the United States government to deal with, and it's not even beginning to grapple with it yet. So if you know who Yevgeny Prigozhin was, he died in a fiery plane crash. He's probably better known as the head of the Wagner Group, the Russian mercenary force. He went a little too close to Moscow for the leadership's liking and was killed. But he also ran one of Russia's two primary global online bullshit factories, including the one that targeted the United States in 2016, but also has been responsible for things like getting the American military kicked out of Niger in Africa by turning the public against the American military in favor of the Russian military, all this kind of stuff. We're living in the 21st century in a new era of information warfare, whether we like it or not. The primary national competitors of the United States have invested heavily in this and are continuing to do so. As scary as the Russians are, the Chinese are a lot better and have demonstrated way better ability to bring AI into the production of all of that online manipulative content, and they're doing it in countries around the world, primarily aiming to chip away at America's national standing and alliances everywhere on the planet. AI is, if you think about Prigozhin's primary limitation in his ability to manipulate a country's information environment with fake accounts and all kinds of online techniques, it was the troll farm budget, the head count he could afford to have sit in an office in St. Petersburg at keyboards. How many of those people could he afford? AI removes that resource limitation because the trade-off between high-scale, low-quality manipulative assets like bots and fake accounts and online personas, and the trade-off between quantity and quality used to be the primarily based on human headcount. Now AI is able to do all of that content generation and behavioral, all the online behaviors that those humans had to do, and they can do it vastly cheaper. A fake online news report that pre-AI would cost you about $700 to $800 to produce. A newsreader in front of a green screen with a composite background that you thought was real news costs you basically $1,000. It costs you $5 today. The main thing with AI is not deep fakes. It's not that it produces content that you can't tell is not real. That is not the danger of it. The danger of it is it removes the resource limitation on bad actors manipulating at scale with good enough content. This problem has been, this capability has been seized by adversarial nations, and they're using it right now and developing their capability to do that. And we're not doing anything about it.
See, it's hard to talk to John because I talk about like a permitting system, and then he goes right to Yevgeny Prigozhin, getting back off in a plane crash. Yeah, thanks, John.
Thank you. And I'm just going to be quick. I would say the trend I'm seeing is public AI, not public interest AI. Public AI is centered around like building infrastructure that governments, and Daniel, you had mentioned it before, do you build versus buy? This is inviting governments to build an infrastructure around AI and create it where it can be open source, no different than libraries or bridges. So I'm really interested in that, and I'm starting to see more in that space. So,
Okay, I think we got time for maybe one question. We're out of time, I should say. So if anyone needs to, you can go. The music's going to start playing. I think the music in this setting is like the With and Proofs coming in and singing a song on our way out. But if there's maybe one quick question, we can.
Yeah, I have a question. It's I'm very familiar with DOE's American Challenge Prize, which is a way of generating ideas across the spectrum of energy areas in the country. Do you see, I know that DOE in this administration, they're continuing that, but do you see some other type of American-made challenge prize, maybe that's a combination of philanthropy or other VC investors that are really around creating ideas, fomenting ideas through an American-made challenge prize that can really foster not incumbents, but true entrepreneurs that are deserve a chance to have their technology be tested in the marketplace.
I could just go really fast. I'm starting to see an emergence of more accelerators come out of like government cities. Like for instance, the city I live in, which is Oakland, California, and like the new mayor is trying to implement a way in which Oakland can become the AI capital of the Bay Area. So for them, it's more of like, how do we create an accelerator where we invite folks from all over to compete, to challenge each other, and create like these innovations around ethical and responsible AI. So I'm starting to see that. So I would say just trends around other cities creating these challenges. So those are my thoughts.
One thought, there are a couple ecosystems, like there's Code for America, which has been like a great seed for a lot of small companies. Andreessen Horowitz has this American Dynamism project that they're running. But I think the exciting thing is, like to what Jeff was saying, is you're starting to see GovTech pop up just in mainstream funds like Y Combinator, which is one of the leading, incubators in the world, put out a call for companies. And one of the verticals that they were asking for ideas to come in from was in GovTech and civic tech. So it shows that there's, a bit of the stigma that Jeff was talking about, this backwater investing, has kind of come off. I think one of the benefits of Doge is that it has brought this issue to a national conversation, brought excitement and energy around it and debate around it. So I think to really fund these things at scale, those sorts of prizes are awesome, great, and there should be one for sure. But it's also exciting to see some of the more mainstream funds see this as just opportunistic and bring capital in through that. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And thanks again. So I should have led with thanks again to the panelists, to Yale Ventures, and to Caroline for helping, and you all for taking the time.